Very good. I just had this microphone muted while everyone else was talking. So, well, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about bent lamination, which is what the topic was requested. And so, to start off, I'm sitting in one of my rocking chairs, and it incorporates steam bending as well as bent lamination. And so if you can't steam bend something, you can certainly use bent lamination to create whatever project it is that you would like to do. The tightness of the radius certainly will dictate what steam bending can do. And if the radius is too tight, then bent lamination will allow you to overcome that problem by making the laminates thinner, and we'll talk about that more. But as you can see, this rocking chair has steam bent back legs and slats, but the rockers are bent lamination. And I learned to do this process from Sam Maloof back in 1982 or 83. And I've been using that ever since for the rockers. And Sam and anyone else that would ever have attempted to use steam bent rockers would have learned fairly quickly that spring back causes them to have slightly differing radiuses. And as a result, the chair would have a slight wave action feel if you use steam bent rockers. So bent lamination using 7 layers of laminates, which is 6 glue lines, will have 0 spring back, and you'll get perfect straight rocking motion without any wave action at all. So that's a very important reason for having the bent lamination on the rockers. Now, the bending forms, I designed this particular bending form so that my laminates are up in the air and open to the air on both sides, and that way the glue cures very evenly, and that is very important. And I call that an open form, where it's open on both sides. A closed form would be where this might be laying flat on something, and the bottom side, the glue does not get exposure to the air for the curing process. So that's why I have designed my bending forms standing up like this, and I added aluminum angles to give reference for the laminates. And when it comes to preparing the laminates, when I take a board, before I ever cut any of the strips, I put a big V mark across it, and then I start cutting the laminates, and that way I can keep them in order when I glue them back together. And this way, the rockers have absolute consistent color. You cannot tell that it's not a solid board, even to having the sapwood included in it. So I'm going to count out 7 of the laminates, and 7 is what I would want for the rocker. And then I would want 6 more for the landing pads, and the landing pads are where the leg lands on the rocker. There's a stack that's built up, and I will be showing you that process. But I will start off, this is the rocker that's been bent, and this would be the 6 laminates that will form the landing pads. And you can see the V mark across the landing pads and the rocker, so that again, those are kept in order, so that as this gets glued up, the grain continues through the rocker right up to the leg of the chair. Now these haven't been glued on yet. This set has been glued on, and then a lot of sculpting and shaping will be done from this point. And this would be a completed rocker. Unfortunately, this one happens to be from a bad accident that one of my chairs was in and got destroyed. And so I kept parts of it just so that I would be able to have a demonstration model like this. So there was a lot of material that was sculpted away from the landing pads that were added on. And that's why I need that extra material to build up. And Sam Maloof created that. And of course, he learned much of what he did in his design style from Hans Wegner, just a fabulous Danish furniture designer and builder. And so that's where you get this kind of modern Danish look in Sam Maloof, and even in this Appalachian ladderback rocking chair.
Hey, Russ.
Yes.
We have a question. What type of glue do you use?
Haven't gotten to that point, but we will do that. And
Okay.
let me just finish talking about preparing the bending form, and then we'll talk about the glues.
Thank you.
You bet. Now, when it comes to gluing up the rockers, I'm not going to be gluing up tonight because the temperature is just too low. I would like to have it 70 degrees in order to use the urea formaldehyde glues, or most of the glues should be about 70 degrees, but particularly the urea formaldehyde glue that I like to use in bent lamination. And so before I would do that, I would like to take paste wax and wax my bending forms and the cauls, which will compress the laminates. I'd like to wax those so that the glue doesn't stick to the bending form. So that's always an important thing to remember when you're doing bent lamination work. The glues, the one that I prefer is the urea formaldehyde glue, and in this case, it's known as Unibond 800, and you can certainly get that from Vacuum Press company back in Maine, and Vacuum Clamp. I don't know if they still are here up in Oceanside, but they had a glue similar to this, and that was that resin type glue with the powder to 2-part glue is my favorite type of a glue for bent lamination. You follow the instructions for measuring out the powder with measuring spoons and measuring cups to get your ratios correct. You possibly even will use some type of a scale for weighing them. Once you become familiar with the amount of powder to resin, you'll be able to just pour your resin into a container and sprinkle on the powder and just mix it up thoroughly. And then you can use a roller to roll on the glue, and that's the sequence that I go through. Another type of glue that's a powder that you just add water is the weld wood plastic resin. And you may find that some of these glues are no longer available in Southern California. We've lost many, many products just because of the Air Pollution Control District restrictions and rules. And even this one, you may have to order it from out of state, but you can get it. This regular yellow glue will work on these rockers because this is a 40-inch radius. And that's not a really tight radius where I have to worry a lot about what I call creep. Whereas after they're bent, yellow glue and white glue is known as a semi-rigid glue that never cures rock hard like these two glues. These glues cure rock hard just like epoxy. And I use epoxy for teak and cocobolo, those really oily woods. I have found that there's no other glue that will bond those, and even those two glues, cocobolo, can still fail. It's just difficult to glue oily woods like teak and cocobolo. But the yellow glue will work because it's not an extremely tight radius. Let me just demonstrate how I would prepare the laminates. I would have the laminates laid out so that I can roll the glue on both surfaces, on both sides. I don't pretend to think that I will get adequate transfer from one to the other if I only put glue on one and stick another piece of wood next to it. I roll both of them and just have the surface fully wetted. And again, with practice, a little bit of experience, you will learn to recognize whether you have too much and whether it's just about right so that it's not running all over the place once you put clamping pressure on. And certainly there will be glue running down the sides of my bending form a little bit, but as long as it's not just running and dripping all over the place, I don't mind having a little bead of squeeze out on every one of these laminates. Then I know that I had enough.
What's the thickness of your plywood?
The laminates will be cut to the thickness in which they will bend in the radius. And it's an excellent question because you have designed your rocker. And of course, in this case, the radius for this rocker is 40 inches. And that's just been determined from decades, maybe even centuries, of people making rocking chairs and knowing whether they rock too fast or if you have to push to get it to rock. If it's too flat, you have to work to make it rock. But if it's just right, it just takes the slightest bit of upper body motion and the chair moves smoothly for you. So To be able to bend one laminate in this form without it breaking is my rule of thumb for how thick it needs to be. If it breaks, it was too thick, and I need to make it thinner. And once I have determined the thickness, then I need to know how thick I want the rocker to be, and that determines how many laminates I need. And so with 7 laminates, I will be able to glue up one rocker. And I have to look at my V marks that I have placed on these laminates, and the V marks on these 6, which will become the landing pads. They have to become the top part of this rocker. It just so happens the way I designed this bending form that the top of it is going to be on the bottom side here. So the 6 laminates need to be the ones that go on the bottom. And so I need 7 of them here, and the other 6 will go down below. So these 6 will be the landing pads that get glued on later, like this, so that they line up. So I have to compress these laminates uniformly after I put the glue on, and I have designed cauls that will compress a portion of these laminates. And so when you design a bending form that's doing bent lamination, you have to account for this thickness, and you have to determine this radius for the bending form, and then you have the thickness of the part that you're bending, and then this radius. So if this happens to be a 40-inch radius, and this is, we'll just say 1.25 inches thick, what would this one be? It's going to be a little larger. It's going to be 1.25 inches larger. So I guess it would be 41.25 inch radius on this, in order to have perfect contact for even compression when I put the clamps on. So I'm going to make sure that it's going to fit within my form. I'll put a clamp in the middle and start bringing it down. You'll notice that I have 15 holes in this bending form, and therefore I need 15 clamps. And the reason for 15 is what I call vector forces. It's the clamp pressure that gets transmitted from this clamp head through these laminates. It goes out at a 90-degree angle, 45 degrees this way and 45 this way, going through those laminates. And so I want this one to overlap with the forces from this one and so on through all of those clamps. So that's why the spacing is such on those, all those clamps. And so now I would have another clamp on this side. I do alternate one on each side. And when I've got glue on these laminates, they can kind of squirm around and be misaligned. And so I usually like to have some little, just 1/4 inch pieces of plywood that allow me to squeeze all of these laminates up against these aluminum angles And I have another one here. And I would put one on each side, and that'll draw all the laminates up against the aluminum angles and register them so that the rocker, it's all going to be as straight as possible and the least cleanup possible after this is glued up. I obviously have to clean this up and clean all the glue off. And the straighter it is and cleaner, the easier it will be to clean up. So I will continue installing the clamps. You can see I stick a few clamps on each end of my bending form so I can grab one in each direction. Now I have a call that continues on. Now that I have clamp pressure here, I can remove this pad and this pad, and I can go to my next call, which will pull this portion down. I've got one radius running all the way to this point, and then this rocker reverses direction. And when I first met Brian Boggs and learned to make the ladder back chairs from him, his rocker on his chair, still to this day, is very much like the shaker style rockers with a slot in the leg and a thin rocker that's cut out of a wide board to create the radius. And it works just fine. But when I saw the beautiful reversing curves on the back legs that he had designed, and I'd already made a Maloof rocker several years earlier, and I knew how to do this, to me, it was just a perfect match. I had to join those rockers with that back leg. And so I told my wife, I said, well, I've got an Appalachian ladder back rocking chair, but I've got Maloof arms and Maloof rockers. And so she nicknamed it an Appaloofa. So I thought that was pretty cool. But I just look for the best features in ladder back chairs and Windsor chairs from the different regions, and I try to incorporate the best features, whether it be in the joinery or the beauty of the lines and the design, just to please my artistic view. And I encourage all of you to do the same. It's not that you have to design everything new yourself. I don't consider myself to be a great designer. I've just utilized what I've seen and watched other people do and admired their work and have tried to do my best to not disappoint them with what I've made from their work. So anyway, that's how I kind of view the design part of it. It's my interpretation of Sam's work and Brian Boggs' work when it comes to this rocking chair.
Another question, Russ.
Yes.
How did you cut? What machines did you use to cut the laminate?
Excellent question of what machines do I use? Well, obviously, I take that wide board that I've just marked my V across, and once I've determined that laminate thickness, what it needs to be, then I set up on my bandsaw to cut these as close as possible and still leave enough to go through my little Performax wide belt sander and sand these each to 3/16. And so that's where all of these wind up at, is 3/16. And so whatever 7 of them is, that's how thick my rocker is. And you all can calculate that out. So I would bring this on down, and again, I will alternate the clamps. And I made small little recesses in each of the cawls so that my clamps have a little pocket to drop into, and it keeps them in place and they're not skating all over the place. I even cut a little piece of 220 wet and dry abrasive and stuck down in the bottom of them so that the little steel pad grips that and the little pad's not spinning around while you're trying to operate the clamp. And so on the other end, I would use the same process to bring this end of the laminates down to the form. And I think that's probably enough for you to see the process. And all of these glues, the yellow glue, the urea formaldehyde, the weldwood plastic resin, they all need 12 to 24 hours, just to be on the safe side. I'll leave them in their form for 24 hours. And so that's how I make up a rocker. And then after it comes out of that bending form, then I will take these 6 landing pad strips that match this piece. And I'll locate where they need to be cut off. And it always pains me, but this material and this material, for the most part, winds up as scrap pieces that rarely ever get used. I mean, they could be glued together to make something, but I usually wind up drowning in leftover pieces like that. That's always frustrating to me, to have wastefulness. And that's what always frustrated me so much about building a Maloof style rocker. It was just so many odd shaped pieces left from cutting things out from patterns rather than doing the steam bent back legs and the slats. But in order to have the beauty of this combination, I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of material on that rocker to have the long reversing curves match each other. The same with the arm. There's quite a lot of waste in cutting out this arm from an 8/4 piece of wood. But again, I just love the look of it, the comfort, the feel. And so at some point, you decide what you're willing to sacrifice and not lose sleep over it.
So what's the working time, open working time of the glue?
Both the urea formaldehyde glue and the weldwood, they're about 20 to 30 minutes once you mix it up. In reality, the yellow glue is not any more than that either. When it's tacking up and you need to get it rolled on and get the pieces on and under clamp and squeeze out the excess before it starts gelling up. So pretty much 30 minutes, I would say, so having everything organized, go through a dry run, just like I've done here, clamping everything up, being satisfied you have the right number of clamps. Everything went very well. At that point, now you can start your glue up. But until you're really comfortable with it, don't proceed with the glue up.
Russ, are your landing pads bent too?
Yes, I did not bring the, there is a space in here because this rocker is curved and these are straight. And so I have a short caul that gets clamped on here and squeezes this down to the rocker itself. And so the rocker becomes the form that the landing pad is being squeezed to. And so, yes, excellent question. I just forgot to bring that little caul. But here you can see the curvature on these landing pads from where they were squeezed down.
Do you ever use cellophane to control the squeeze out or keep it from getting all over the place?
I have not used cellophane. However, there is, and I was going to talk about this a little later, but right now is just fine. If you want to do some free-form type bent lamination using the stretch wrap material that we use today, if you cut very thin strips, and these are almost veneer thickness, but I cut them on the bandsaw and sanded them, and I don't know how many's here, but they were kept in order. There's my marks, my V mark across that, but then I wrap, after the glue is applied, I immediately wrap it in the stretch wrap. And now I can twist it, I can bend it like this, and all these pieces can be bent into some unusual shapes. And then you could clamp them in a jig while the glue sets. Joanne and Marty, two women that were students of mine at Palomar College in the bending class and the chair classes, decided they wanted to build a double settee, but and it's made of cherry and the seat's upholstered and maybe the back, but the front leg, the arm going up and across the crest rail and back down the other side was all done very similar to this, where this is the front leg coming up from the floor. You would have gone like this, and then it would have twisted around to make the crest rail. And so it's just a way in which to have something that's free form. Just experiment, try stuff. Let's move on to the next project. If there are other questions, by all means ask. Now, in my book, Making Ladder Back Chairs with Russ Filbeck, in the rocking chair section, everything that I just talked about, how to build this bending form, everything is right here. And in the back of the book are all of the patterns and plans for building all of my jigs, including this bending form. So it's all here in my book, and that's available on my website. This bending form is designed to make serving trays. I apologize, I got a cramp. These laminates were bent around this form And you can do both ends on the same bending form, plus the handles for the serving tray also have their own bending form right here on this piece of melamine. Now, this is what I do not care for, and that is a closed form where this piece would be glued up with this touching this solid material, and no air can get to the backside of those laminates. And if you have this style of a bending form, you need to give it an extra day for curing, because the bottom side just won't cure as well. Drawing up a pattern and determining the radiuses for your bending form. The handles have a different radius because they're thinner and they're centered. So each item here has a different radius. Determining your joinery and having half lap joinery or what other style of joinery you might like. Having the bottom in a serving tray similar to this in bent lamination needs to be made of plywood, can be veneered, but you shouldn't use solid wood because the solid wood needs to expand and contract with ambient humidity changes. And this tray does not move. And so what's going to happen is if you use solid wood, it's going to buckle upwards or downwards, or something's going to give. So just like in drawers, where you do not want to capture the drawer bottom, if it's solid wood, it needs to be able to expand and contract or use plywood materials. Each of the cauls that go with a portion of this bending form and each radius, I've just kept everything on this particular bending form together to make serving trays. And this is the pattern to make a bottom on the inside of one of those serving trays. So that's just another style of a project that you might want to consider. Anything that your mind can imagine, you should be able to create. When it comes to highly figured woods, in this case, piece of crotch grain walnut. This crotch grain material, if I were to bend this, it'll just crack somewhere. And for steam bending, that just would not work. And so on this chair, I really like having the crotch grain flame run all the way across the crest rail. And I know I can't steam bend that, it would fracture. So this crest rail has been cut into about 10 or 12 thin laminates and glued back together. And that's what these laminates are. And the figure is just amazing. And you just do not want it to fracture and be destroyed. So knowing about bent lamination gives you the ability to use that amazing piece of wood and not have it get destroyed. And then once once you have all the laminates cut, then you need some type of a bending form in which to bend all of those laminates and allow the glue to cure. And in this case, it's a single radius instead of a reversing curve like the rockers on that rocking chair. Here is just a single radius. The same with that serving tray. That was just a single radius. So I can use a single caul to compress, but you'll notice that I do use these aluminum angles that register, and I can put my laminates slightly apart. My laminates can go straight across, and then I can start pulling the bending form together until it compresses. And I may have to have heavier duty clamps. There's another option, and that would be to cut this caul into 3 sections, or this piece into 3 sections, so that the center section pulls it down part way, and then you pull this end in and bring it down to where it's properly compressed, and then do this end. I have made all of the crest rails for the fan back Windsor chairs that I've done with this form, using just this process. But it does require a little bit stronger clamps than the little 6-inch bar clamps, just because it's got the single radius and I'm compressing this whole piece. And then once the glue is set up, and again, you can see that it's open to air underneath as well as on top by sitting on those aluminum angles, and it registers the laminate so that they're nice and straight. And then once I take it out of the bending form, I'll create a pattern that is the shape that I happen to like for the crest rail on a Windsor chair, and I can trace it out and do the cutting on the bandsaw after it's glued up. Trying to bend these laminates with any of these cutouts, trying to glue it up by cutting that out beforehand, I prefer not to attempt, because again, this can be pretty fragile, and having all of these stacked against each other, each one is supporting the one next to it. And that's what enables me to clamp them all up and have virtually no failure. And that's important to me, that I have that kind of success when I'm bending.
Can you talk about radius versus thickness of your laminate plies?
Well, again, yes, the radius versus the thickness goes back to, on the rocker, I said, I have to be able to bend one of them through the complete curvatures dry, all by itself. And once I've made it thin enough to bend without breaking, then I just need to make up enough of them to make the thickness of the part. So this particular laminate probably will bend without failing. So that one was cut and sanded to the thickness necessary. Now, if it was any thicker, it very well might break. And so that's how I arrive at. I don't have a magic number to give you, as it needs to be this thickness for this radius. Different species of wood are different. The straightness of the grain. That's one of the reasons I like to go to Pennsylvania to harvest my own trees, so that I can get a tree that's 100 feet tall, and the lower 20 to 40 feet of that tree is straight and free of branches. So I get this really nice straight grain for bending back legs without a lot of failure. But then when you come to a piece of wood like this where the grain is all over the place, you have to have a different option. And that's where this bent lamination comes in, because there's no way I can do the steam bending on this. Plus, after you've done a few, you can use some really unusual woods like this black acacia, which grows here locally. These black acacia trees grew right down by the Naval Training Center and Liberty Station. And it's only here in Southern California that you can get that beautiful wood. So when you find something like that, figure out how to get the grain as straight as possible out of the boards that you have. And if it's a pretty exceptional piece, you may be willing to sacrifice some material to have the straighter grain just for the parts that are going to be bent. For any of the parts like the rungs that are going to be turned or certainly not bent, they may have more flaws in them. You can see these rungs have knots in them, and there is no way that could function on a bent piece of wood. It would fail. So you learn to be very selective so that you can harvest out the parts and include the sapwood. These two arms have sapwood in it. All the slats have a little bit of sapwood right at the top edge. So don't shy away from incorporating sapwood into your pieces. Just as long as you look at it this way, where I had them be symmetrical, one on each side, or the top of each slat. It was all out of the same piece of wood, and therefore the grain matches perfect. And that little bit of sapwood is part of the natural look. And so it's, I guess that's the beauty of woodworking. It's never ending what you can learn. If you get tired of making chairs, you can certainly go into marquetry or turning or toy making. I mean, there's no end. So enjoy whatever it is that you're doing and do some experimenting. Try some different things and give it a lot of thought, but then put your thoughts into action and make some. So I guess my parting piece of advice is don't endure the drudgery of boredom or depression. Make something. Make it until you're happy with your craftsmanship, and then give that to somebody special as a gift. So it'll make your whole day. Thanks.
One last question.
Got another question?
Were the plans for the serving tray part of your book or not?
No. My Windsor chairs and this serving tray are not part of the plans for mine. This is simply a 6-inch radius, 12 inches in diameter. That was really difficult to create with it. But no, can be quite simple in the design part of it.
I'm just relating questions.
Okay, no, I appreciate, yeah. And let's go ahead and open it up. If there are other questions, let's do that.
I've been asking them as they come along.
Okay, so.
There's a thank you.
Well, I've enjoyed doing it for you. So I'm always happy to do this.
Russ, could I ask a question? Would you
Yeah.
would you tell us about the process for preparing each of the little pieces? Do you cut them on the bandsaw and then band them in between, or?
They're not all shot.
I do about a 30-minute exercise routine every day so that I'm loose, limber, and all my joints are well lubricated, because I really like having Mother Nature or gravity be my extra pair of hands, because she holds everything down here for me. Nothing is falling, and so I really do like working right on the floor. Weaving my chair seats, everything I do on the floor. But I do it every day, so therefore that's why they stay pretty well lubricated.
Okay, so does anybody have any other questions? All right. So, Russ, I just want to thank you. That was very entertaining. Really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure, thank you.
All right.
Hey, Russ.
Okay, folks, I'm going to go ahead, we're going to go ahead and end the meeting. And thanks everybody for attending. And we're looking forward to just getting back to and looking forward to meeting everybody and working together and
I got the
getting
feeling
ideas and brainstorming.
me working on my knees, major knees hurt.
No, I just figured your brain.
Sympathetic pain.
Yeah, it's something I just do.
Keep that.
Yeah, I do it all every day.